of my very favorite parts of all the Olympic coverage was the fact that they finally focused in on some of the physiology that occurs while a long-distance runner is running, some of the things that occur in the brain. And just to mention those briefly, one of the things that occurs after a certain level of mileage is that the the right hemisphere of the brain, which is the side that accounts for the creative and aesthetic appreciation and that sort of thing, gets stimulated. And it's the same kind of thing that people seek when they take drugs, really, when they're trying to get high. And so there is a high. There's a real physiological occurrence.
Now, is this the endorphin kick-in that we're talking about?
Well, the endorphins are related. Yeah, the endorphins are something that is stimulated along with the left side of the brain being stimulated. Actually, probably Dr. Wood knows a great deal more about the physiology. But the other thing that happens that I think affects the risk involved in running is that the left hemisphere of the brain, which is your reasoning, which is your common sense kind of thing, begins to shut down. It begins to be dimmed, when you're running, especially the further you go. When you get up to about 20 miles or so, you feel like you could run and you want to run forever, and there's nothing to tell you shouldn't.
Do you think? And we're going to meet Dr. Peter Wood in just a moment. But do you think that we've become obsessed with exercise? Are you obsessed with what you do as a runner?
Well, yeah.
Did you let a day go by without running?
No, actually I can't, and I actually have somewhat of a paranoia about getting an injury of some kind that would stop me from running for a long period of time. Even, times when I've had to lay off for a day or more, my roommates can tell you that I'm hell to live with at that point.
So it really alters your mood tremendously. Do you get depressed? Do you get itchy, antsy?
Yeah, right. I get anxious, and my whole self-image is really wrapped up in being a runner, and so it isn't just the physiology that I mentioned before. It's when I'm running, I feel on top of the world, and I feel in touch with the world, and it's a whole way for me to perceive the world and to feel my place in it. And when that gets cut off, then suddenly I'm questioning who I am and what I'm about. If I can't run, what am I? Is what occurs to me.
But that's like somebody who says, as long as I have this job, I'm worthy, I'm adequate, I have a place in the world, and then all of a sudden gets fired and goes to pieces. If you, for example, received a knee injury or something, would you in fact go to pieces if you were told that you could no longer run? Or do you think you could channel that into something else?
Well, hopefully I could. That's one of those nightmarish kinds of things for me to think about is having to face that possibility. And I don't know. I really don't know.
Would you say that running is probably more important to you than any relationship you have?
There's somebody watching out here who really wants the answer to that question, I think. And actually, she knows that there are certain priorities in my life, and they're running and her. And
so running is number one.
Yeah,
and
it is.
This isn't to put you on the spot by any means, but I think again we're talking of the obsession with exercise is almost as dangerous as no exercise at all.
Yeah, I think that an obsession with exercise is probably, in some ways, close to as dangerous. But that's a tough question to answer without speaking about a particular individual. I, for example, have been very fortunate not to, I've really pushed myself to some limits that people warned me, about and were worried about running as much as 200 miles a week and such, and haven't.
Well, how many miles do you run now?
Well, I run anywhere from around 100 up to toward 200 miles a week when I'm training for something big.
But not only that, but just time. I mean, a good portion of your day is spent running, then, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it is, but there are ways that I've found to work it into my life so that it's not such a tremendous interruption. For example, I had to come down here today, and I ran down here.
From where? Fremont?
Well, from the other side of town, but that running has become my transportation. So that, you know, I don't spend the time riding in a car either, you know. And so I save that time and just run to wherever I go, carry a backpack with clothes or whatever I need, and, you know, I'm ready. So.
How long have you been running?
15 years, I think, or so.
Were you as obligated, maybe obligated isn't the right word, were you as into running right from the beginning as you are today?
Yeah, the first time I did it, I was studying to be a priest, and was in a seminary that was very intense scholastically, and there was a lot of pressure, and one day it was just all I could take to not go off my nut, and so I just took off running out in the woods, just spontaneously, and ran several miles, and it's, you know, I was in pretty good shape and playing soccer and such then, and it was such a wonderful feeling, just that first time, that I think from then on I haven't been able to really look away from it.
You know, we talked just a little bit about the endorphins, which are a morphine-like substance that the brain secretes, I guess, and I'm not medically savvy about this, after a certain period of time. Could it be a possibility that you are hooked on your own endorphins, that you need to get that high, that runner's high all the time? It's really maybe a chemical need as well as a psychological need.
Oh, I think it definitely is a chemical need. Yeah, there. You know, if you talk to a lot of runners and mix up conversations with people like that and people who are hooked on drugs, you'll find the same kinds of obsessive attitude toward it. You know, there's that certain need to get that fix every day. You know, it really it's not unlike a drug addict in some ways.
Again, the whole idea of asking David some of these questions is not to put him on the spot, but to talk about the obsession of exercise. And in a moment, we're going to meet Dr. Peter Wood and find out about someone like Jim Fixx, who died of a massive heart attack, who ran every day. Someone like a Gabriella Anderson, who was determined to finish that race, even though the possibility was great. She could have caused brain damage to herself. We'll be back right after this. Stay tuned.
Health researchers on the subject of diet and running. Would you welcome Dr. Peter Wood? Well, we finally got you on, Peter. Nice to see you again. You've been with us before. You knew Jim Fixx, and I'm sure was as surprised as we were to find out that a man who had dedicated his life to running had a massive heart attack and dropped dead while running. What do you think the cause was? There's lots of theories.
Well, of course, it was a very sad event and extremely ironic because of Jim's notability as a running author. On the other hand, I think a number of people knew that his family history was very poor. His father had had very early heart disease and died early from a heart attack. In those circumstances, the statistical facts of the matter are that his risk of himself having a heart attack and possibly dying was certainly very much higher than was true for the population in general. So for that reason, I can't say that I'm exceedingly surprised. The autopsy report showed that he had very severe coronary disease, and in fact, frankly, in those circumstances, could have died at any minute. The ironic thing, of course, is that he died with his running shoes on.
So I think this points out here, it's not running that is bad or exercise that is bad, but while you're doing this, you got to take care of yourself. And are you finding that a lot of exercise folks, runners, are not taking care of themselves the way they should?
I think that certainly the running population, which includes a very large number of people if you go down to very occasional runners, are learning a great deal about all sorts of health matters that are very important to them. But I think some of the ones that are beginning to be learned, where we need to speed up the process, do relate to adequate hydration while you're running, and that brings us on to Gabriella, of course, and that people should, everybody should look out for signs of major diseases and tailor their life accordingly.
But one of the interesting things with the James Fixx case was that they felt that because he was in such good shape as a runner, that perhaps that masked some of his symptoms that people who wouldn't run, say, as much as he did, would have had, i.e. chest pains, pains in his arms, and things like that. That because he ran so much and had such a heavy fitness program, that those symptoms were masked.
Well, I think there's a tendency for people, perhaps including physicians, to think that if somebody is physically fit, then they must be generally well. We know that that isn't necessarily the case, although it's usually the case. And so you do get occasional cases where heart disease can progress to a very considerable extent, almost asymptomatic. And they often say that the first symptom of heart disease is sudden death. And it's very possible that Jim knew very little before that. That wouldn't be uncommon.
Now, David, you've said already, an obsessive, addicted runner. Looking at Gabriella Anderson of Switzerland, do you think she should have been pulled from that race, your personal opinion?
Well, 2 points of view. One, if I were Gabriella, I would say no. Don't make me stop. I'm out here to finish this Olympic marathon, and I'm going to finish it. I don't care what it costs. Of course, the coach, the coaching point of view, the person whose brain has not been affected by all the miles, that have been put in and is still rational, should look at that person and say, yeah, there's no point in her finishing this. She could really harm herself permanently from the dehydration, and there are cases where there's been permanent brain damage caused from somebody extending themselves beyond that point where they should be running. So a coach really should look at that and say, yeah, pull her, no matter what she says.
You're a coach. Would have you pulled her?
Yeah, that'd be tough. My coaching is not at the level, the caliber of Olympics. It's more of an informal coaching, just helping out people who want to run and want to train or want to get in shape kind of things. And so for them, when they're out running, it's much easier to say, okay, you've had enough, it's time to stop. But when you're at that level of the Olympics, when that has become such a goal for so many years for one person,
it's hard to yank that away from them. But wasn't there a man in Vancouver who ran a marathon, had the same kind of things that Gabriella had, and then did sustain?
That's very true, and that was Jim Peters, who was a British runner in the Commonwealth Games, I think in the early 60s, as I recall. He was a very bad case and entered the stadium at the end of the marathon there with obviously severe dehydration, collapsed several times around the last lap, and in fact could not finish. That was certainly a very severe case, and several stages worse, I guess, than Gabriella's. There was also a case of a gentleman, Guy, from Belgium in 1948 Olympics, who entered the stadium first in the Olympic marathon, collapsed several times, but managed to finish third. So he has, on his wall in Belgium, a bronze medal. Now, you have to think, in his case, should he have been pulled? As far as I know, he had no permanent damage. He obviously was suffering. He has a bronze medal. I agree with David entirely. It's a very close call at that level.
Yeah. And it's tough to know that dehydration and running that hard can cause the body temperature to go up to 104, 108 degrees.
That's right.
We'll be back after a commercial break. Any kind of exercise you do in the fitness program you join. David, you had a question.
Whenever I run or exert myself in any way, I have chest pains on both sides of my chest, and then they come back every once in a while. And I want to know if that's normal or, is there something wrong?
You have to be very careful with chest pain, and I certainly wouldn't ignore it. I think the indication, from your description, would be that it would be worth seeking medical opinion about it. But on the other hand, those of us who've run for many, many years know that a variety of aches and pains, you could call them pains, do afflict runners in the stomach, abdomen, chest area. And so it's very probable that it is in fact nothing. But you cannot say, because of the possible dangers of chest pain and indications of heart disease, that you should ignore them and not look at them. I think runners have to make decisions all the time as to whether what they're feeling is a little stomach discomfort or whether they have chest pain, and they're constantly making these decisions.
How do you make those decisions, though? The whole theory, no pain, no gain. I mean, even in aerobics class, I know that I can work and I think my knee is driving me crazy. Is this something that's normal, or I should just work over it? Or is it my body really trying to tell me something, like get off the knee or don't do what you're doing?
So one of the ways that I deal with particular pains that come up is do a little experimenting of my own, which is, for example, with various kinds of pains in the abdomen or the chest or something. Very often that's just what you call a stitch, and we've all had stitches at one time or another, and then they go away. Often you can run through that. But if it's something like knees or something that's reoccurring on a regular basis, I tend to I slack off a little bit, I don't stop running, but test, running different surfaces or running in different shoes or running it with a little different style, maybe going a little slower, not doing the speed work or not doing the hills, whatever, and see if it changes, see if it starts to go away.
I don't think no pain, no gain is meant to go through injuries. It's if you get tired, don't just quit because you're tired. But if you've got an injury, I think you have to pay attention to that. Kathy, you had a question. Or a comment, actually.
I'm married to someone who feels the need to run very consistently, and to someone who is not running, it often seems to me almost sort of masochistic. Is that because I don't run and I can't understand it? I would just be curious to have
It's
someone...
because runners don't smile when they run? Well, runners tend to look like kind of a dour lot, I guess. It does look like we're in pain while we're out there.
And you're also skinny.
Yeah.
You just look underfed and serious.
Unhappy.
Unhappy.
Yeah, well, we're not.
Well, isn't it true that many runners really looking absolutely terrible in the Olympics, for instance, probably had their best minute ever at that time, and they look extremely upset and tense, but they're really up here. Boy, that is the moment of their life. So you can't tell from appearances at Olympics.
I'd be interested to know, Kathy, have you ever tried running? Did you ever consider running alongside?
Oh, I'd probably die within the first 10 minutes.
And he never encouraged you to
No,
run?
because it's for him, he has a stressful job, and it's a way for him to be by himself and exercise, and he likes that, I think, the solitary aspect of it.
That's a tremendous benefit, really, especially for someone with a stressful job, to be able to get out there and just be alone with themselves running. Another thing that happens when you're running is that a thing called the internal dialogue, the way we talk to ourselves inside all the time, where you're always worrying about this or that, or what the next thing coming up in your day is, or that sort of thing. That tends to shut off, and that's really the best break you can give yourself when you're high stress.
Don't you ever get bored? When I tried it, I run, probably 2 or 3 blocks.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to quit, go home, and because you get bored.
It always feels like an adventure to me. It's, as I mentioned before, a way of exploring, really, to me. It's when you get it to a capacity where you can do a lot of miles and do it comfortably, you can use it in so many ways. I often take off, on a day off, just put a few things in a backpack and take off, run across the Golden Gate Bridge and over to Marin somewhere to a nice park, and it's just, exploring along the way and just cruising along.
Bravado.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to run to Eureka every once in a while. We're going to take a commercial break and be right back.
Guys, we're finding out this morning here on People Are Talking. Joan, you had a question.
Yes, I was very surprised to find out during the Olympics, one of the announcers mentioned that especially long-distance and marathon runners are tired all of the time, not just while they're training. And I'm wondering, doesn't this sort of defeat the whole purpose?
I don't think that's true. I think most of the time long-distance runners are remarkably energetic and have plenty of energy. They will, of course, tend to feel tired in relation to very long runs and very hard training, but I think most of the time they've got plenty of get up and go. It's certainly my experience.
I remember that statement really well when that guy said that, and I was sitting next to a person who knows what my lifestyle is like and all the running I do, and that's just not true at all. Sometimes those announcers just say things that I don't know where they come from, and they're definitely not from their experience. I think it was, in fact, Marty LaGuardia that said that, and he should know. I mean, he certainly doesn't look tired all the time, and he was a world-class runner,
Fran, you had a question.
Yes, I'd like to know if running has any effect on your libido.
I was thinking if you're tired all the time, I'm trying to tie it all together.
Oh, you want me to answer that? Well, it does have, some effect in as much as anything that is that much a part of your life has an effect on your sex life. Even I think the kind of jobs we have or sleeping habits we have or whatever, they all relate to the sex life somehow. But the specific question that I've been asked before is whether or not it diminishes sex drive. to do that much running? And the answer is no.
He says with a large smile.
And, there was always that old theory that, especially world-class competitors and I think coaches in high school used to tell their athletes that, having sex before the big game is always a no-no. Well, it really is actually, it's very good for you because in competition you tend to be nervous and so it relaxes you. But it's
Sometimes that ends up being the big game.
Linda, you had a question about women in running.
Yeah, I was curious about the stress on the woman's body. I read that it's really bad for your pelvis.
I don't really think that's true. I think women were made to run as much as men. I think you see this in other animal species, that the female usually does as well, sometimes better than the male. I don't think that's really the case. Possibly some of this has come from the fact that, as you know, it was very uncommon for women to run any distance at all. If you go back even 15 years, people forget this. And I think that it does take a certain amount of time for people's attitudes to change, and possibly even for some sort of development to take place in the population to strengthen various muscles. But basically, I don't see any difference.
It's interesting. We learned from Dr. Teresa Crenshaw last week that a lot of women lose their periods if they are long-distance runners. And she said that really has a basis in history, because she said millions and millions of years ago, when we were all cavemen and women ran a great deal. Everybody ran for food and what have you, and it was like a natural form of birth control.
Yeah.
See? That was a That's cocktail party conversation this weekend.
This is going to be a wild Friday night around the Bay Area. Millie, you had a question, or a comment, actually.
Yeah, shouldn't people that are planning on running, shouldn't they check with their physician first to make sure they're physically able to do this type of exercise?
I think the answer to that is that it's a very good idea to be in touch with your medical advisor, and certainly if you had been sedentary for quite some time and were planning to go into running or similar exercise, I think it would make a lot of sense to mention to him that that's what you plan to do. I really think it's much better to leave it to him to decide what's done next. In other words, saying, I've got to have a stress test is probably not the thing to do. He ought to know whether you need a stress test or not. But I think saying, I'm planning to run, what do you think, would be a very good idea.
Gail, you had a question about the stress test.
Oh, well, I think he answered it, but I was interested in knowing, when you are admitted to the hospital to take the treadmill stress test as a patient, is that equivalent to jogging and running so many miles?
Well, the test that's given does vary somewhat. Sometimes it's conducted on a treadmill and you walk or run. Sometimes it's conducted on a bicycle. But it's anything where you do get your heart rate and your breathing rate up, and at that point, usually your electrocardiogram is measured, and this certainly gives you a more sensitive idea of how your heart is functioning, whether you have any problem when you're exercising. I should add, though, that it isn't necessarily completely foolproof. It's one of a number of tools that we have to look and see whether your heart's in good shape.
We're going to go away again for a couple of minutes, and we'll return shortly. Exercise, and are we a little obsessed with exercise, and should we be more careful in the kinds of exercise we do? Melissa, you had a question.
Yes, I'd like to know if there's any permanent brain damage to the Gabriella, the Anderson. Yeah.
I frankly can't say that I know, but I think it's extremely unlikely, frankly, and I've certainly not heard anything. What perhaps we should know is that some degree of effect due to dehydration is not uncommon in runners in large races. The big races like the New York Marathon and the Boston Marathon each year, quite a number of people are affected, and probably that's because they're somewhat dehydrated and really haven't drunk enough before and during the race, which they should do, especially just water. But I think that they virtually all recover, with a very few sad cases where there is probably some residual damage. But it is extremely rare that there's anything
Let's talk marathons now. Let's talk people who are just going out on their own on the weekend and running a lot of miles. First of all, is there a temperature you should not run in? Weather-wise. And I'm trying to think what other kind of temperature there would be. And then secondly, should you take water with you?
Well, the answer to the first question is definitely avoiding real high temperatures. Direct sunlight is good if you're going to do over 5 miles, And fortunately, this area, this city particularly, is great for long distance running because it's so foggy. Fog is one of the best things in the world to run in, and because it just keeps you cool and keeps you the outside of your body moisturized. The other question is the basic rule of thumb is if you're going to be running, especially at a pretty intense level, say in a race, there's a rule in the organizations that put on races that you're supposed to have water every 5 kilometers, which is about 3 miles. So, yeah, if you're going to be running and it's hot, particularly, it is a good idea to carry water or to have something set up so that you can get water along the way. It's very important to stay hydrated during that.
Debbie, you had a question.
Yes, is running okay when you're pregnant, or is it too stressful on the unborn baby? The impact.
Now, we should point out here, you're a doctor of research and all. You're not a medical doctor, either of you, so.
Well, actually, I've had a bit of background in it, and it's very important to point out that none of this is, real medical advice. I at one time was a sex educator, and we did some research on women and pregnant running, and many women run all the way through a pregnancy. And the key to that, though, is a woman who is pregnant really shouldn't start running. That's not the time. But a woman who has been running and gets pregnant, if she feels comfortable with it, and of course it should be all under the consultation of with a doctor. But in many cases, there isn't any harm involved in it. The fetus is so cushioned in the amniotic sac and the fluids, and the jarring of running really doesn't have a terrible effect. If somebody's prone toward miscarriage, that would of course make a big difference. But I know several women who have run up till the day before they delivered.
Well, aerobics classes, women have gone to the day. I think you have to work closely with your doctor.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Adrian, you had a question.
You talk about preparing your body for running, but how do you prepare your mind?
The question of wanting to run and psyching yourself into it. I had a coach early on when I was running in college, Ed Winrow, who at one time held the American record for an obscure run called the Hour Run. I always remember that about him. But he told me, whenever you really don't want to run, you'll find an excuse. And whenever I am tempted with the idea, I don't know if I can fit it into my schedule today or whatever, then I remember what he said and realize that, the excuses are always handy. The key is to get yourself into a mindset where you decide, do I want to run or not? Do I want to be in shape? And set up a schedule, set up something, and don't break from it. Usually, if people once they're out running for about 5 or 10 minutes warmed up, then they're really glad they did it. It's getting started that is the toughest part. There's no question of that.
We have in our audience Jack Galean. How long have you been running, Jack?
I've been running for 5 years now.
And how many miles a day?
Around 12 a day.
12 miles a day.
7 days a week.
Now, have you run today yet?
Yeah, I ran in the morning.
You've run your 12 miles already today?
No, I ran 40 minutes. I'll also run this evening.
So a lot of times you split up your run. You can split up your run. Have you been out with an injury at all, Jack? Have you ever had a period of time where you couldn't run?
Nothing serious yet.
What got you into running in the first place?
Oh, about 5 years ago, I was sitting around watching TV one day, and I watched Bill Rogers win the New York Marathon, and that got me inspired. I went out and started running with one of my teachers, and since then I've just been addicted to it.
Tony, you had a question.
Oh, yeah. I was wondering when it's best to eat or take liquids, before running or after running, or drinking liquids during running constantly. That really helps.
Good question.
Let me try that. I think as far as liquids are concerned, we've sort of covered that. It's extremely important to be well hydrated if it's at least hot or humid, so do drink before, during, and after running. It's an absolute rule. So far as eating's concerned, I think some people, especially if they're just starting to run, don't perhaps realize that they can have stomach discomfort, might even feel it as chest discomfort, as a result of eating too recently before the run. And so I think that is very important. For many people, not eating for several hours before running is quite important. You're not going to run out of energy.
Barbara.
Yes, you were asking about people being obsessed with exercise. I think there are a lot of people that have a regular program of moderate exercise, And it's been so wonderful to have your awareness awaken that it takes care of high blood pressure in some cases and a weight problem. And there are other exercises. We kind of got into running this morning, but swimming, walking, bicycling, you can get the same conditioning effects, I'm sure, from those.
But haven't they found out through medical research that exercise really does slow down the aging process? I mean, it is good for you.
Well, look at me, I'm 45. No, I'm kidding.
So am I. I think that there probably is some truth that some aspects of the aging process are slowed down, although it's a little difficult to be too definite. However, as far as general health is concerned, we should point out in this whole discussion that Jim Fixx's death and Gabriella's unfortunate incident, all of this has taken place against an astonishing improvement in America's health. The exercise explosion has taken place in the last 15 years, and during that time, down has come the heart disease rate, and down has come the stroke rate in this country. So something must be going on that's right.
I read something in Newsweek not too long ago that said, you know, women have osteoporosis, which is the weakening of bones as they get older and head toward menopause, and that